How many of you, just show of hands, how many of you think this is the greatest time of change in the history of our species? Okay, a lot of hands up, most hands up. It's an interesting and tough problem to solve, okay? Scientists have a hard time answering that question. This is the way they do it, the best ones. What they do is they basically imagine or measure a small child born today, let's say a young baby woman born in rural India, rural China, and they ask how much will her standard of living improve over her lifetime relative to her parents and her grandparents. And then they also go back and say, when in the course of human events has there been a similar rise in the standard of human living over 3 generations at any prior time in history? When you do it that way, what you discover is that we live in one of the 4 most intense times of change in the history of our species. Now, importantly, none of those other 3 times are in living memory. And what that means pragmatically is you cannot sit at the feet of your beloved granny and say, gee, Granny, what was it like when the Persians invented the number 0? That must have been super badass, huh? And that's what's so interesting about the time we live in, and the fact that most of us perceive it to be extraordinary and completely out of control. Now, I'm thrilled to be here at the B2B Next Conference, and I've been talking to Andy for months about the importance of this space and the reason why innovating in this space is one of the biggest drivers of economic progress the world over. But I'm also here to tell you that most people do it wrong. They think it's about running their business just a little bit better, getting a little bit more digital, adding a little bit more technology, and the truth is it's a much bigger shift than that. The graphic I built for you for today is this network diagram. What I'm going to try to convince you is that the dumbest way to think is about your business as a standalone business. And what you have to become skilled at is thinking about your business inside of a network where your goal is to be nodal. That is to say, and this is a phrase from C.K. Prahalad, one of my heroes, and one of the guys that I was lucky enough to teach with all over the world when he was still alive. And C.K. Prahalad said that being nodal means that you're disproportionately influential for your size inside of the network you operate in, okay? So I'm going to talk about what it means to achieve that, but I'm specifically going to give you principles about how you innovate effectively, especially with the boldest innovation that is difficult and challenging. So the first thing I want to give you some practice in, or some ways to think about, is how to spot big shifts instead of little shifts. Most of us are spending almost all of our time trying to get some metric on some graph to move a little bit up and to the right. So the first of 3 bite-sized nuggets I'm going to cover in the brief time that we have together is about sort of thinking big instead of little. Because unfortunately, in a time of extraordinary change, the challenge is to spot not just the trees, but the forest that you're living in. And that is harder than it seems, rarer than most people imagine, and it's an interesting sort of skill to get at. Now, again, I asked you if we live in an extraordinary time of change. About 85% of the hands went up in the room. Here's one of the reasons why we perceive it to be so extraordinary. All kinds of things that were a big deal when we were kids, like broadcast networks, have been displaced by other kinds of things that are very different in the way they behave, right? So broadcasting is given away to streaming. By the way, I'm sure some of you know this. About 28% of all of the internet power in the world is used by Netflix. And at any given moment, at 8 o'clock at night, in any time zone in the United States, about 45% of all internet traffic is Netflix streaming. It gives you a little sense of the scale there. We used to sort of take taxis outside of a hotel like the Hilton, and now, of course, we expect to have some vehicle come at our beck and call through an app where we'll know the driver's name, the driver will know our rating, we'll know the driver's rating. The world's largest internal combustion engine company has somehow or other gotten upstaged by a very tiny but ferocious little startup that is trying to convince the world that we can change the entire nature of how transportation is powered and managed and optimized. Big networks that did the hard work of creating telephones in the first place, and then copper cables, and then fiber optic cables, and transatlantic cables, are discovering themselves completely upstaged by people that are totally willing to give away those services for free. That's kind of a upsetting business model to emerge in your space, right? I mean, remember Admiral Swainson's law, a collision at sea can ruin your whole day? I mean, that's the kind of feeling that that engenders. And of course, there are places that have been building extraordinarily costly brick and mortar kinds of sales places. The Mall of America has 4 functioning submarines. That's significantly more than the entire nation of Canada. And yet those things are being displaced, as we all know, by online shopping, Amazon in this country, Alibaba elsewhere in the world. Those of you taking pictures of the slides, you're welcome to do so, but it is my spirit, my goal, to be generous, so I've already posted them for you on a secure website. So maybe just stay in the conversation, and we'll see if we can understand it together. So the first question I asked you is, do we live in an extraordinary time of change? And the preponderance of the room thought, yes, we do. Let me ask you now a tough, maybe rude question at 8 o'clock in the morning. What's changing faster, your business or the marketplace that you're embedded in? How many of you think your business is changing faster than the marketplace? How many think the marketplace is changing faster than your business? Look at the hands in the room. Please keep them up for a moment. Look around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an extremely important, very basic innovation diagnostic. If the marketplace is changing faster than your firm, you're already in trouble. You just haven't figured out how it's going to manifest yet. Now, I'm not being critical of you. I'm super empathetic about that condition. And what Andy specifically asked me to address for you is the ways in which you can make innovation pragmatic, actionable, and routine instead of rare. And that's what I'm committed to do. So I'm going to trade off of 39 years of research and innovation effectiveness and the very best tools available in the world so that you can get past the normal ways people innovate, which are spectacularly lame, okay? Across all industries and all geographies, here are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. When companies commit themselves to something unfamiliar, only about 4 or 5 initiatives out of every 100 even barely return the cost of capital. So that means that innovation practices, as done by most folks, are roughly where medicine was when the super sophisticated and promising treatment of the day was leeches, okay? So my job, really my joy, the thing that I've been doing for a very long time, is to try to get innovation to give up its secrets. Last night I was with my graduate students at the world's toughest design school till about 10 o'clock at night. I also teach at Kellogg Graduate School of Management. Through the years, I've managed to be able to victimize 6,600 master's or PhD students. It's an exciting time for the topic of innovation, and the people that are doing it well are getting success rates 7, 10, even 20 times beyond the global norms. So it really is true that innovation is giving up its secrets, and it's my hope that in the next few minutes I'll teach you some practical ways to do it. Here's principle number 1. Most people believe that innovation is fundamentally connected to technology, that if they're not good at the technology, they're not good at innovation. One of the things I challenged Andy to think about in this track that he's introduced for today, Innovation and Technology, is that the technology is actually a small component, 2 to 5%. Your ability to think profoundly about what a customer is trying to do and about how you're going to get your unfair share of attention is really the key. And one of the most important principles for you to master is embedded right here in this subtitle, that modern innovation is much more about the elegant integration of well-known things than it is about the primary invention of truly new things. And let me illustrate that for you with the appification of the world, right? As we sit here on this Wednesday morning, there's 2.2 million apps available for your iOS device and 2.8 million available for your Android devices, and nobody needs that many. So we hear about the cool ones from our friends, we stick them in our devices, and then somehow or other they manage to manage themselves pretty elegantly, right? Unlike PC world, in the 1980s and 1990s. You'd get yourself a new PC. It had new PC smell, which is very exciting. It's technically off-gassing and bad for you, but leaving that out there to quiver, it functions really nicely for like 6, maybe 7 weeks, and then it gets wonky, and you go looking for an 11-year-old or your tech support team to fix it, right? Unlike that world, in the appification world, what happens is the actual individual apps are embedded in a system that tracks errors and failures and breakdowns. Every individual firm managing any of these apps can walk into the office on any given morning and get reports talking about the hundreds of thousands or scores or millions of things that might have been adverse events that happened yesterday. And the bots that do that are sophisticated enough to actually point the programming teams to the offending code. That is the reason why the appification world improves faster than anything else with the characteristics you see here on the right. The characteristics of the ecosystem are that they're asset light, they're fast, they're rated, they're open porous, they get continuously better depending on how you've set your sort of controls on your own personal apps. And that is a very different way to look at the ecosystem. But with a sophisticated B2B audience, what you want to look at is the way in which the total economics in this ecosystem are completely different than anything before this in history. So looking at it from the vantage point of an individual end user, you and me and our beloved devices, what you see is that it's really easy for us to go through and find cool new stuff that we might like, that might be relevant to our lives, and to discover the things that actually are, and to use them routinely. But from the vantage point of service providers, companies the world over, it's extraordinarily cheap and fast to build an app in order to potentially reach more than 2 billion individuals and to see if anybody likes what you're putting forth for them. Will the dogs eat the dog food? And that is unprecedented in the ease with which we're creating matchups between sort of providers of services and goods and the people that might find them useful. Understanding that what we're really in is a time of radically altering the total market economics for serving organizations matters a lot. In the B2B world, of course, the additional complexity is that you have to do that with extraordinary efficiency. You are the lubricants in the gears of the modern global economy. Your job is to be the easiest to do business with. But I'm going to argue in our brief time together that's only one of 3 critical jobs that you have to manage well. This, however, is a watershed change here in the 21st century. Nothing has ever been this easy before, and that's one of the things that contributes to your sense that we're in a time of extraordinary change. Incidentally, the data is now clear that whatever you think the pace of change is today on Wednesday morning, data shows that tomorrow, Thursday morning, it will be marginally greater by just a little bit, and again, a little bit greater on Friday. Not only are we in an extraordinary time of change, we're in an accelerating time of change, partly because the economics for trying new things are lower than ever before. In the spirit of spotting big shifts, I want to sort of give you the sense that what the greatest innovators always do is focus on something that's irritating, hard, annoying, and say, why? Why don't we make that a little bit better? Now, we have a bunch of American billionaires, some more obnoxious than others, but I'm betting that most of you have never heard of Rich Barton. How many of you have never heard of Rich Barton in the room? Just please be, yeah, there you go. This is the billionaire you've never heard of, and shockingly, this guy has created 3, count them, 3 different unicorn firms. And I want you to notice that he's always done it with the same playbook. Many years ago, he wondered why, when he wanted to sort of fly from Seattle, where he was living at the time, to Vegas, he couldn't just figure out what the price of the flight was. He had to go to some abstruse specialist, a travel agent, who would stare at an impenetrable screen of green data and then tell him what the price was for the flight. And Rich thought that was stupid, so he created Expedia and sold it for well over $1 billion to Microsoft. About then, I think he could afford his first really nice home, and he discovered that no one could tell him what a fair price would be for the home he wanted to buy, or for that matter, for the home he wanted to sell. You had to go to an abstruse specialist, a realtor, and they would tell you with magic incantations what the price should be. And Rich started to suspect that they were not very interested in maximizing his profit, but rather in streamlining their sale. So he created another amazing multi-billion-dollar firm called Zillow. And later he discovered that if you try to join a company, nobody actually knows what it's like to work there until they're actually working there, and he thought that was stupid. So his third great unicorn company was Glassdoor. But I want you to notice the exact thing he does every time. He looks for things that are painful, stupid, black box that nobody understands, and turns it into a glass box that anybody can understand easily. A simple way to flip adversity, something that people are annoyed by, to advantage. So there's one place in the world that makes it easier than ever before to do those kinds of things. These kinds of basic plays in a modern digital innovation playbook are exactly at the heart of the way B2B leaders need to think. What is more common, of course, is that you feel like you're not very influential inside of your network, that you're always dancing the tune of Grainger, or Amazon, or Walmart, or Home Depot, or Lowe's, or somebody else. And I want to give you the sense that you have agency, you have power, you can innovate inside of those conditions in ways that are really practical. So this is the second of three basic topics I want to be able to do for you. I want to teach you what we know now about innovating in powerful, routine, extraordinary ways. This is about blowing up the myths and substituting methods, rooting out the lore and substituting logic, and really understanding the nature of innovation and how it functions. And again, I'm going to focus on specifically the innovation that is inside of complicated, orchestrated networks, which is really B2B at its best. Now, this is the segment that Andy and I sort of talked a lot about, where I will be giving you a whole bunch of tools that most of you have probably never heard of before that are around the topic of innovation effectiveness. So yes, I'm an egghead innovation scientist. But my joy in life has been to turn what we've discovered into pragmatic tools that allow people in pain, knowing they need to change their rate of change, eager to be bolder, to do so fearlessly and successfully. That's what this segment of the festivities is all about. Now, I wrote a book about this. This is not a sales pitch for the book, by the way. This is a rueful admission of idiocy on my part, because I spent 5 years in a dark closet writing this book. There's more than $6 million worth of research in it, and that was stupid. And I remember vividly one day coming out of my little writing closet, kind of blinking like a gopher, and one of my brilliant anthropologists stared at me, vaguely remembered that I had founded the company some time before and thought she needed to be polite, so she said, "How's that book thing coming?" And I thought she was sincere, so I said, well, you know, the data in chapter 14 is kind of kicking my tiny hiney. And she did what people do when they're trying to get away from crazy people. She's nodding and distancing herself and sort of turning away and staring at her phone. But what's great about anthropologists, and if you don't know one, you should, is that she gave me a gift on her way rushing to a different postal code. And what she did is she turned over her shoulder and she said, "Hey, you know, nobody reads books anymore, right?" And I thought, shit. That's why you hire anthropologists. They tell you how the world really works, okay? So look, I know that most of you don't have time to read books. I will tell you that there's more than 100 innovations in this book, and it's designed to be visual and scannable for when you're in trouble. It's also got really heavy paper, so you know, if you've got an insect problem in your home and you whack the insect with this book, you're going to win and the insect is going to lose. So that's practical, and we really designed it with that in mind. But look, here's the deal. There's 2,700 books on the topic of innovation. Nobody needs another one. This is now the #3 all-time bestseller. And the reason, I think, is because we tried to distill it into practical terms. And again, I know you don't have time to read a book, so let me now distill for you the critical discovery at the heart of the research a discovery that we made, wait for it, 22 years ago. Now here's what we did, using a guy who is generally considered to be the world's best innovation methodologist, Vijay Kumar, a great manager of the project, Ewan Duncan, who now manages global telephony for McKinsey & Company. And under my direction, what we started to do was to gather up more than 1,200 innovations so important that they had changed industries or categories or the world as a whole. 1,200 of them over a long swath of history, going back about 210 years. So we had the Model T Ford, we had penicillin, we had things like encyclopedias and then Wikipedias, and we had microprocessors. We had such a cat's breakfast of things that we assumed we would get nothing when we tried to cross-compare them. Vijay Kumar stuck them into computers using a variety of condensation and pattern recognition techniques, and came out of his little closet one day and said, hey, wait, I think I've got something here. And we said, do tell. And he said, look, it appears that all throughout history, unbeknownst to any of us, when people need to innovate, they do so by using a very small number of discrete, what we originally called levers. Now we call them types of innovation, 10 types. Now, color at Doblin is never decorative and never random. So the colors on this slide are what you should pay attention to most. This stuff in blue, really it's how your business functions, how you make money, how you're connected to other businesses, the structure inside your own firm and the talent that you're using, and the processes that you build in order to survive and thrive. That is normally taught in the better business schools. So the blue stuff, business schools. In the middle is the actual products that you're offering and the product systems and the services and support that you're offering. We call that the product system itself. That's taught in the better engineering schools. And over here on the red are the things like services that you provide, the channels that you use to get to market with as lowest friction as possible, the brand and the way you manage it so people expect extraordinary things from you, and the ways in which you engage in a bi-directional way the customers you're trying to serve, the close customers and the far customers, okay? And that's taught in the better design schools or the better social science schools. Now, nobody has the time or the money to get all of those degrees. And by the way, if they did, they'd be insufferable eggheads that the rest of us wouldn't want to work with, right? So the deal is that innovation, bold innovation, is always a team sport. You have to do it with these kinds of skills represented in the room. You need people with business chops, engineering chops, and design and experience chops. And if you don't have that, you are specifically made weaker. Rule of thumb, you want to change an industry, change a category, build yourself a unicorn. Rule of thumb is 5 or more types of innovation, and all 3 colors have to be used. When you learn to do that with the right tools and methods, what you get, this is really important, is a smaller number of bigger ideas. See, brainstorming is, in my judgment, a carcinogen the Surgeon General should get around to regulating. The idea of being in a room and having some facilitator there that says, hey, there's no such thing as a bad idea. Are you kidding me? I mean, we fought a Gulf War for $3.6 trillion, and all we got was really more sophisticated and committed terrorists. There really are such things as bad ideas. And second rule of brainstorming, more ideas is better than fewer ideas. Wrong. Emphatically wrong. What you want is a smaller number of bigger ideas, ladies and gentlemen. That's all you have time to focus on, a smaller number of bigger ideas. Second, you want to make sure that you know what you're supposed to implement. And when you do it with the formula that I'm describing, the most deeply researched framework in the history of innovation, because we've redone the analysis every other year for 22 straight years, what you get is things that are much harder for others to copy. So think about that for a second. Bolder ideas, easier to implement, harder to copy. That is nothing less than the genetic code of a badass breakthrough. So learning to do it routinely is the heart of what you need to do. Now, when I teach this to my graduate students, they seem to all have now the attention span of squirrels on meth. So I've had to distill it into a shorter sense of challenges, okay? Condensing it into something that's really elementary. And what I've taught them is that the way you do it is to pass 3 tests. You got to be culturally cool. You got to get your unfair share of attention. People have to have some buzz about what your firm is able to do. Even if you live inside of a network of other firms that sort of insulate you from the end user. It's your job to create a cool kids club. More about that later. You do have to use technology in some elegant way, but please do not make the nearly universal mistake of thinking that this is 95% of the problem. There is no technology ever invented that you cannot license in a really easy, affordable, modular way today. That's why I say it's 5% of the problem, not 95% of the problem. And you have to do something that is perceived to have a fair business model at the core. Whatever you think of Google today, when we first started using it 26 years ago, it felt like magic. You could type into that simple query box any question you had about the world. The O's would stretch out, showing you how many things Google had found, but they always had this little button, I'm feeling lucky, because they were super confident that their algorithms would drive you to exactly the right thing with the next click, okay? And you got charged the low, low everyday price of nothing for that. It's kind of like opening your hand and finding a turkey in it. And that's what modern technology does for us, is it creates this sense of magic and amazement, and we tell our friends about it. Those are the 3 tests that matter: culturally cool, technically elegant, and a perceived fair business model. Connecting it back to the prior slide, this is the stuff in blue, this is the stuff in gold, this is the stuff in red. All of them matter. So if you don't have a balanced approach to innovation, where you're finding yourself some anthropologists and some designers, you're buying or renting some technological chops that are great, and you're producing things that have a really, really amazing pricing model, business model, revenue model, maybe with some services on the back end, you're missing the opportunity for true greatness. Okay, that's the critical thing. Again, the mistakes that people make is they think that their job is to just use technology. It isn't. It's to balance that with a business model or pricing model that's brilliant. Pricing is one of the greatest topics in modern business-to-business management. And you also have to create an experience for the end user and for the close customer that makes you the easiest to do business with, the lowest friction provider in the network. Rules of thumb now. With your engineers, you want to be able to ask, hey, what has recently become possible, pragmatic, affordable, that before now was hard to do or rare or costly? With your business leaders, you want to say, how do I turn this into a machine that just gets better every time I run it, and that throws off enough free cash flow with each transaction to earn me the privilege of doing it over again? And when you look at it with anthropologists and designers, you want to ask a bigger question. In addition to what I sell today, what kind of miseries or inconveniences or friction for the user live outside of that? And how can I innovate into that misery, like Rich Barton learned to do, okay? How can I just have a bolder ambition about what I'm going to do to create something that's truly desirable? When you learn to balance those questions, you get a much better chance of seeing sooner than anyone else, glimpsing a sense of what ought to come next in your industry. For bonus points, please bring the kind of value system that says, I want to do it in a way that long-term makes a community proud of my company and eager to do business with me, right? As opposed to what we're seeing now increasingly for many of the largest platform technology firms. So rule of thumb, 5 or more types of innovation, all 3 colors, and specifically focusing on something that your competitors are missing. That's the way you produce a breakthrough. Now, how do you do that mechanically? Well, to get hired at my firm, Doblin, you have to be familiar with at least 75 or 80 pieces of modern innovation. We call it tradecraft, methodologies and tools. For you, what I'm going to do is to sneeze onto the screen the 10 that matter in any well-run organization. So the first thing is, for any particular project, here's a fun fact to know and tell. More than 90% of the time, the initial challenge you give to an innovation team will be, through no fault of your own, wrong. So the heart of great innovation is humility. and understanding that you're probably wrong about the thing you're trying to solve. Doesn't mean what you've decided to ask people to think about isn't important. It's probably just incomplete. So the first thing you want to do is to challenge the boundaries of what you're innovating into, because more than 90% of the time, you haven't got those boundaries set right. Usually that means making the problem a little bigger. Rarely, but not 0% of the time, you actually want to focus down and do something that's actually simpler. You need to have some consistent way to define, measure, and teach your colleagues how to innovate. Please do not do what is nearly universal. Look for a couple of things on the internet, find one article, send it to everybody before the brainstorming session and say, I want everybody to read this article before we do the brainstorming on Thursday morning. I think it's really our problem. This is what people do all over the world. They construct this crazy quilt of the ways to think about innovation. I don't care if it's the work that I did, but just please make it a consistent, systematic view of innovation. IDEO is given away for free, their innovation toolkit. Open IDEO, it's called. Great organization. 37 of my students are there. It's a very important phenomenon that you have a consistent way to talk about the topic and understand what it is. Many years ago, Doblin created the first ever diagnostics for innovation. What that means is in a matter of 2 to 5 weeks, we can tell any organization or government or philanthropy anywhere in the world 2 objective things. One is, what are your capabilities for innovation on a 100-point scale? And the other is, what is your performance for innovation on a 100-point scale? Think about it in terms of medicine. The first thing you want to do with any patient is to develop a baseline of where they stand. Understanding the diagnostic starting place turns out to be crucial if you want to improve your performance steadily over time. For the B2B talent in the room, this is my one most important tool that I'd like you to be aware of. It's the opposite of brainstorming. It's the fix for brainstorming. So I'll go into it more in a little bit, but this is how you brainstorm, or rather develop in a disciplined way, platform-level innovations instead of products. And products are the stupidest thing to focus on, but it's nearly always what people focus on instead. Once you learn to do that, you stick those into a portfolio and you manage them with care. There's a revolution going on. I like to talk about how innovation was done in the old days, 3 years ago, versus how it's done now. So what I teach at Kellogg is lightweight innovation, clouds, crowds, partners, and prizes. All the ways to get the boldest innovation to happen today in a fraction of the time, at a fraction of the cost that was routine 3 years ago. So instead of $500,000 for a website, it's basically $10,000. And I'm talking about a state-of-the-art website. Learning to do that in the right ways matters. Figuring out where to put your pilots so you don't mess up your whole business, but you just bet a little piece of it. Having sometimes war rooms where you concentrate your ability to discover the future, and metrics, incentives, and rewards so that you overcome the internal inertia in your own firm. You've got to figure out how to reward it for people in ways that actually work. Now, those are the basic tools, but I promised I would go deeper into that one in the middle. So this is a generic tool that I use with graduate students. This is version 11 of this technology. It's been used to create 14,500 platform-level innovations in 55 different industries on 5 continents. And every single time at Doblin, we are mostly obsessed about figuring out if the tool worked or not. So we go back and fix the tool. I said this is the opposite of brainstorming. So the first page merely gives you the principles that you're trying to achieve and allows you to identify the types of innovations that you're going to go for. Gives you a place to write your mission in a nutshell and identify the team members so you know who to reward. But this page is what matters. 14 questions in exactly the right order to not cause people to generate, 138 ideas in the next 2 hours and then vote with sticky dots, okay? But rather to generate one idea in about 2 hours that they're then willing to hang their careers on. Oh my goodness, is that ever a big deal? This is what we call high protocol innovation. Protocols, ladies and gentlemen, is how we teach medicine. There's a reason why if you get hurt in Chicago and end up in Mercy Hospital a few blocks from here, Northwestern Hospital a few blocks from here, in an emergency room at 3 o'clock in the morning where you're absolutely certain to get the C team that are still in class, they're actually unlikely to kill you, which is sort of a miracle, okay? And that's high protocol ways in which those things work. That's what we've done here. 14 questions in the right sequence. Oh, by the way, a little bit sassy. First one, working name, short, memorable. And it says in parentheses, it may help to do this last. Second one, description. And the short language says, what's it going to do? And then in parentheses, so that you know that it's being a little sassy, how would you explain it to your mother? Okay, we're trying to make this stuff as easy and simple as possible. This page gets you to an initial idea that's likely to work in your firm against your competitors and with the partners and your routes to market that really matter in B2B. This page is 116 known tactics, and that's all there is in the whole world of how you actually build it. And this page is how you build it cheaper and faster than ever before. And this page is how you get the business model right, because this matters. Business models are wiggly little suckers, okay? And they tend to be different when your concept is brand new than they are in the middle stages when you're attracting more partners to your own platform, and in the late stages when you can do extraordinarily unusual things. Most people don't know how to play that kind of chess game over time, and that's how we've broken that down. Now, the critical thing is, years ago, walking in the hallway past one of my Innovation Navy SEALs, a brilliant guy named Ryan Pickell, I said, so Ryan, there's only 10 types of innovation. Why don't you show me the generic tactics under each one? And he looked at me. Ryan's hilarious, but he manages that with a grouchy interface, a little bit like Eeyore. He said, that would be hard. And I said, I know, Ryan. That's why you got to do it, because I'm not going to. And then I forgot all about it. And 7 weeks later, I bump into him again. He says, I got that thing. I said, what thing? He says, the tactics you wanted. I said, really? Show me. And so he did, and he gave me this eye chart. And I started challenging him the way I do with my own colleagues. I said, so how often are you finding a new one? He says, initially, several times a day. And then it slowed down to one a month. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's really only 1 or 2 new ones per year. But we keep looking for the tactics. I tested his methodology many other ways. He always had great answers. So finally, I decided to give him a low blow. I said, so Ryan, you're a designer, man. Why is it so ugly? Thought I really had him that time. Of course, he was 10 steps ahead of me, and Ryan had already produced it as a deck of innovation cards. I don't know if it pleases anybody else, but it sure amuses me that you can now deal yourself a poker hand of innovation. So if you know you need a better profit model, you know you need a different route to market, you know you need a better experience, but you're baffled about how to do that, these cards distill all the known ways to do it. And of the leading 7,000 platform businesses in the world, we've taken apart every single one of them and distilled them into these known tactics. You can buy this set of tactics cards off of Amazon for 79 bucks, right? The current set has only 116 known tactics, each one defined and explained, simple protocols for how you can use it, little cases on each one that show you who's using it particularly well. Ryan took millions of dollars worth of research and turned it into a tool so simple anybody can use it. That's the kind of stuff that we love. Now, I've been talking about platforms, and I want to really emphasize how much that matters, because platforms, ladies and gentlemen, are the seed crystals of ecosystems, and ecosystems are the reason B2B exists. Most people have this arrogant sense that they've got to run their business. They're not able to see with the proper level of humility that no, they're just a node in a network, and it's the network that now matters. Getting the economics for that network right and the experiences for that network right. And that means thinking in terms of platforms, not products. When I was a kid, this is what platforms consisted of. And I know many of you are trying to recognize those, so let me help you with that. Those were the shoes worn by Elton John in the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road Tour 1970, never mind. What's amazing and important for us today is that all the interesting things cut across industries and geographies and marketplaces. They streamline what we do, how we do it, and they make it easy to do hard things. That's the heart of a platform, making it easy to do hard things. As we sit here on this Wednesday morning, these are the most valuable consumer platforms in the world. How many of you use at least 3 of those a day? Show of hands. Yeah, everybody in the room. Punchline, the least valuable is worth about 30 billion US dollars. The most valuable worth about 500 billion US dollars. When you learn to think in platforms instead of products, you are working against a bolder ambition, and you're working on things that are going to be much, much, much more valuable over time as and when they succeed. At least as important for your world as these are the most important business-to-business platforms. You use every one of these every day. You simply cannot escape these suckers unless you're in a submersible at the bottom of the ocean and you have no support team anywhere in the world. This is the heart of your world. And many of them, of course, are sponsors of this extraordinary conference. So I'm not saying anything bad about them, but I am telling you that they very much lubricate the world. This is the way the digital world functions because of organizations like these. The least valuable is worth 40 billion US dollars. The most valuable, well over 400 billion US dollars. And to a very large extent, they govern and shape the envelope inside of which you're supposed to behave. What I like to say is that at the heart of all great innovations, very often, are simple ideas and a heavy dose of humility. Sam Walton in Arkansas one day had a brilliant insight. He says, you know, I've now got stores all over the world. I don't know the first thing about how to be a merchandiser in Toledo, Ohio, or Ottumwa, Iowa, or strange places like Los Angeles or Paris. He said, I don't know what those people want. And inside of that humility, what he created was this extraordinary new way of behaving. See, Procter & Gamble would show up, and they would regale him with songs and snappy patter about why, in 2019, he absolutely needed to carry all 84 different variants of Crest toothpaste, and that they would need, roughly an acre of shelf space in which to do that. And Sam would say, well, you're probably right. You fellas over there at Procter & Gamble are super smart. But here's the thing. I'm not smart enough to know if you're right about that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you this much space, and I'm going to tell you what returns I expect from that much space, turnover and total profits. And if you manage to my goals, well, guess what? We get to be partners again in 2020. That's called vendor-managed inventory, and it comes entirely out of humility, not certitude. And then later, he added the second thing is, oh, it's going to take some computing horsepower to do that. So every year, every supplier has to commit to the new computing standards that they made norm for the year at Walmart. See how simple that is? Made the world's biggest company. Now, most of you live on the other side of that, and in a way that's painful. All the greatest platforms do these kinds of things. Google took only 6 years to become the most valuable media platform in the history of the world. From the get-go, it was using 9 types of innovation. Experts declared that it was going to be a failure. 14 pre-existing search engines. That's all the experts saw. What they didn't see is that for the first time, Google was making sure that any particular advertiser would know for sure how many people came because of that ad. They made a field that was always subjective and sloppy and weak, precise and manageable and extraordinary. Later, they added a 10th type of innovation when they reinvented themselves around mobility, in part through $2.2 billion worth of acquisitions, because they recognized that people also wanted to search off of their mobile phones, okay? Now, we live in a time when the 5 big platforms are starting to be flipped culturally from cool saviors of the world to having this dark side that people are worried about. And again, I'm not being critical of these extraordinary companies. I'm telling you how the culture's perceiving them. And inside of that, you have some extraordinarily important choices to make, and that's the third and final topic I want to cover. Okay, how do you build breakthroughs in the B2B side inside of platforms that you can't control, that you don't have much leverage over, and that all too often have an opaque data model that you're not allowed to see inside of, okay? That's really important and interesting. And I'm going to give you some quick examples because Andy asked me to make sure I had a couple of cases. Here's one that we did in the B2B space for Zurich Financial Services. Every time you see in a city anywhere in the world a tower crane, what you should know is that tower crane tends to be on site for about a year and sometimes 2 years. And during that time, onto that new construction site will come 1,200 to 1,400 subcontractors. And the space we were dealing with was called bonding for contractors. And everybody in this business was going blind filling out paperwork. Okay? So you had to fill out paperwork for every one of those 1,400 subcontractors. This company was one of the best, and it only had 14% market share. And using predictive analytics and big data, 5 types of innovation, what they did instead is they would go to the contractor at the beginning of the 2-year project and say, we'll do the paperwork once, and we will give you, from that point on, a network of subcontractors that will come in and they'll already be bonded. Well, it turns out nobody liked filling out the paperwork. Remember Rich Barton? Find something irritating, make it elegant, and become the industry leader. By doing the paperwork once, these guys moved from 14% market share to 82% market share in 3 years. It didn't change anything about their business. It just changed their interface to their customers and their promise to it. Here's another one of my favorites. Cemex is the sort of leading cement company in Mexico. But in the biggest cities, Monterrey and Mexico City, they were characterized by Olympic-class traffic jams. Okay? You've seen cement mixers. Inside of a cement mixer is a liquid concrete before it's formed and dries and sets. Well, it turns out if you're in a really bad traffic jam, somewhere between the 3rd and the 4th hour, it doesn't really matter how fast that truck is spinning anymore. It switches from a liquid to a solid. You're not bringing concrete anymore. You're just shipping a rock. And it turns out to be bad for the trucks. Okay? So what they did at Cemex is they created an amazing algorithm and ruined an axiom of the industry. The industry said you had to be lowest cost provider, and that meant always supplying your trucks from one place and having super efficiencies. They said, no, no, no. We're going to have about 12 or 15 different loading sites in different places in Mexico City. And on the basis of today's traffic patterns, we'll tell the truck where to go get filled in order to have a low-friction pathway to the customer, and then they could guarantee, and this is important, guarantee a 10-minute delivery window for liquid cement. That innovation turned out to be so important that later Citigroup and Goldman Sachs showed up and said, we really like this algorithm of yours. Turns out cement is a commodity, but they said on the basis of your algorithm, we think we can now fund your acquisition of any cement company you want anywhere in the world. So in a classic guppy swallows whale pattern, Cemex of Mexico bought Ready Mix in Germany, the world's largest cement company, all because everywhere in the world people tend to deliver cement in complicated traffic conditions. The algorithm was the basis for the transformation. Another example, General Electric has been transforming itself steadily. When I first started teaching at General Electric many years ago, this was a typical innovation pattern for a battery plant in Schenectady. And when I say it to you, I want you to ask yourself, is this what you do? All they would think about is better batteries and better ways to manufacture those batteries. And then they would distribute it in much the same routes to market that anyone else would, through Grainger or through Ace Hardware or Walmart or others, okay? And yes, they had a digitally advanced battery factory, pretty much lights out, very few employees, so their economics were similar to what you would get in China, and they didn't have the shipping costs associated with it. So it felt like a good strategy to them. But we tried to teach them that they weren't thinking deeply enough, and we did that with aircraft engines. And again, so I can calibrate, how many of you have ever purchased a Boeing 737 personally? 757, 787 Dreamliner. Well, here's the weird thing. You buy one of those nice planes, and they don't come with engines. I mean, who knew? So your plane gets delivered many months later, and you put it in the backyard, and all your neighbors come over, and they say, this is a really great plane. How about we go for a ride? And that's when you sort of have to ruefully admit, well, didn't really read the whole contract, and it turns out the engines are extra. We're working on that. And that's when you're going to discover that there's only 3 companies in the whole freaking world that make engines for airplanes: Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney, and General Electric. And engines are $30 million, and each plane needs 2. And they were all trying to beat each other in conventional ways, talking about the engineering excellence of their planes. Only GE said, no, 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 no. The problem is we're selling planes to companies that keep going bankrupt. And this turns out to be bad for cash flow, right? So what they said was, if you insist, you can buy these engines, but we really think that's a bad idea, especially after taking a peek at your balance sheet. Instead, what we'd like to do is to buy back all of the engines you already have, whether we made them or not, and we're so confident we can run them brilliantly for you that we will give you a guarantee that no engine anywhere in your fleet today, anywhere in the world, will be out of service for more than an hour. If that ever happens, we will pay you a fee for disrupting your airline. 6 types of innovation, as you see here. Lots of predictive analytics at the core, but these are the 4 tactics. I really want you to squint at this slide. At the heart of this and most other sophisticated B2B business models that we see is risk sharing, predictive analytics, product bundling, and a guarantee of efficacious performance. Those 4 simple tactics turn out to be the heart of promising something amazing. Now, the guarantee is the tricky bit, because you have to be so good at what you're delivering under the covers that you nearly never have to pay it. That's what makes your business great. And notice that it's a simple thing. Types of innovation thought through with care, color-coded tactics to match so you know how you're delivering on this kind of new kind of ambition. All right. The deal in B2B is ecosystems. And the last couple points that I want to make before I stop irritating Andy by going over time here is that many, many things that we're used to in our lives is the shifts to ecosystem. More or less in chronological order, shipping systems did this a long time ago. The auto industry did it in the 1970s. Global movie and TV production did it sometime after that. You see all these things, sport leagues, healthcare systems. You go to a modern cancer center, MD Anderson in Texas. It's thousands of companies orchestrated with care, all in service of the exact genetic profile of the tumor that you or a loved one is suffering from, all customized. That's shifting to ecosystems. But there's also firms that we're familiar with that were built from the jump as ecosystems, and they tend to be moving at 20 times the clock speed of these industries. 20 times the clock speed. That's why it feels like these guys have an unfair advantage. And inside of the B2B world, firms like these are the ones that have been the dominant orchestrators of organizations like yours that find it harder to get business. Now, the antidote to that is for you to create a cool kids club. This is one of the critical things you have to do. You have to say, even though my job is to be the lowest friction provider to the close customer, my other job is to try to create a different kind of experience, some kind of service that the end user really cares about, that allows me to have a little bit of contact with them that is not insulated and buffered by the close customer. That's what I mean by a cool kids club. The rules of cool kids clubs are pretty easy to understand now. Number 1, assume your end user has digital skills and innovate into those elegantly. Use them. Give them something that they can do with an app or a capability. Anticipate the needs of those users, particularly the irritants that they deal with, and innovate into those, even though it might be out of your comfort zone historically. Treat everybody as if the membership is special. How many of you are members of Amazon Prime, just so I can calibrate? Let me remind you how that happened to you. 8 years ago, you got a little letter one day that said, geez, did you know that of all of the customers that we serve at Amazon, you're one of our favorites? And we got this really cool new business model, you know, this Cool Kids Club that you can join. And if you join, you're going to get free shipping on millions of items. And then they said later in the small print, and you also get to stream, 41,000 movies and TV episodes. And you get to borrow 350,000 things to read on your Kindle. Kindle sold separately, okay? And all of these things were promised in this letter. And you thought, well, I like Amazon. I didn't know they liked me. They sent that damn letter to anybody that ever ordered one single thing from them, okay? That was their Cool Kids Club. Treat everybody as if they're special, and then build the ecosystem around that. That's the Cool Kids Club, but the final slide that I'm sharing with you today is this one. Condensing everything that we know about innovation into a simplified agenda for switched-on B2B companies that has 3 parts. The first part is, specifically, lower the friction. If you're not the easiest to do business with, you're in trouble. The second part is design beyond the transaction. I know the transaction matters to you. Yes, thank the Lord. Somebody specified my product and purchased it. I got my pricing right. I got my channels right. I got my shipping logistics right, all that. But really, you've got to go beyond that in order to have a deeper loyalty cycle with the customers that you're addressing, and you do that with your Cool Kids Club. Modern B2B success demands elegant simplicity in how you behave, plus deep sophistication in what you can do. That's the innovation space. If you're not thinking about it that way, try to think about it that way, because it will help you to build bolder innovations that are routine instead of rare. That's our promise today. Here's where you get the slides. Send an email to support@doblin.com. Mention Andy's great event, B2B Next, and a smart person will send you the slides. And please, 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 above all else, remember the heart of this is to produce things that are culturally cool, technically elegant, and have a perceived fair business model. That is the genetic code of victory. Ladies and gentlemen, I really believe in B2B. I believe it is the lubricant for economies the world over. And having a great conference like this with thoughtful leaders like you trying to be more curious about how to do those things with power and elegance and efficacy is the way we make progress the world over. Thank you very much for the chance to be with you today.